Hey, good morning, Acton. I hope you're staying safe and warm and definitely warmer than I am right now. I just wanted to say good Sunday morning to you. We're doing a little blast from the past. I've got a sermon that I'm queuing up from 2021. I adapted some material from Good Shepherd United Methodist Church and Talbot Davis. He preached back actually in the mid 2000s. But it really made me think about it, and I wanted to share it with you today because we've had this little winter storm that come through. And here in Rutherford, anyway, on this Sunday morning, we still have snow on the ground and some ice definitely on the road. But it made me think about storms. What is it about storms that both attract us, scare us, all those things? I hope you enjoy this today. Storm Chasers. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." So the year is 1996. It's a very, very, very important year. The year that the Atlanta Summer Games, the Olympics, came to the United States. Now, as a kid growing up in the upstate of South Carolina, the Olympics coming to Atlanta was a big deal. I can remember thinking, I've been there, I've seen that, as it played out on TV. And tragically, the Olympic Park bombing happened, as you know, during the Games. That was 1996. The Unabomber was also arrested in 1996, another big event from that year. There were lots of other events that happened, some political, such as Bill Clinton being reelected as president in 1996. And there were other issues in our society, such as Osama bin Laden actually came to the forefront of the scene in 1996 and wrote a scathing statement toward the West, and that began some of his movement, sadly. But all those things happened in 1996, and as important as those are, let me also tell you something else that happened in 1996. In 1996 was my senior year of high school. Now, I don't know if anywhere else had this tradition, but in Chesney, South Carolina, back then, we had something called Senior Skip Day. Now, a very interesting concept because the school knew about it. Matter of fact, they grilled hamburgers and hot dogs for us that day and then just said, "Go along your way. Don't stay at school for the rest of the day." My memory is a little fuzzy on what day of the year it was because I think if I remember right, it had something to do with your 96th day of school for me, because class of 96. So the senior skip day changed every year. But nonetheless, we had this weird tradition that was sanctioned even by the school as an unofficial holiday if you were a senior. So in 1996, in the spring, we had our senior skip day. I remember it was so fun. The principal grilled, as I said, hamburgers and hot dogs for us. We all laughed. We played football out on the quad area of the high school. And then after lunch, we were free to go. So me and a group of friends loaded up in our cars and we headed to the next big town, which was Spartanburg, to see a movie. In 1996, the release of not very critically acclaimed movie called Twister came out. And it had only been out a few days. I remember that because my friends and I, we loaded into the theater and we watched Twister. Definitely not Helen Hunt's most reprised role. But this movie, if you remember, was about a couple of individuals and a whole team, as a matter of fact, who like to chase storms. So the goal was they would find these tornadoes across the Midwest and they would do their best to get in the middle of them. They would try to drive their vehicles or set up their equipment in such a way that they could be in the middle of this tornado. They were storm chasers. I left the theater that day and I thought to myself, who in their right mind would ever want to do this for a living? Now you have to remember, I was a senior in high school. All these career opportunities were coming at me, and I'm thinking, what do I want to be when I grow up? Blah, blah, blah. But I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, when I left the theater that day, the last thing I wanted to do was be a storm chaser for a living. Well, I've come to figure something out now that I'm 42, many years after my senior year of high school, that there are a lot of people in this world who may not be professional storm chasers in the sense of clouds and thunder and lightning, but I've ran across a lot of people who chase storms emotionally in their lives. Perhaps you know a few of those. Perhaps you know of some people who they just don't know how to live without being in the middle of a storm. Now, a lot of us think about the storms of life, and I want to be really clear this morning. We get into storms in life that have absolutely nothing to do with our own fault. We get the phone call, our mother has cancer. We get the phone call, or we show up at work and our company is closing and now we're out of a job. Our spouse comes through the door and says they don't want to be with us anymore. Storms have a way of coming into our world. As a matter of fact, I'm a firm believer that most of us have either come out of a storm, we're in a storm, or we're heading toward a storm. Storms are a natural way of life. They come and they go. But I have known some people who chase them. They love to be in the middle of a storm. There's an interesting passage in the New Testament. I find certain passages of the New Testament and the Old Testament, for that matter, the Judeo-Christian text, to be so interesting, not because of what happens in the miracles, but sometimes what happens in the human nature of the response. One of those times is in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. You can go read it if you choose at some point, but let me just give you the gist of it. There's a storm that is raging on the sea, and Jesus and his disciples are there. And there's this storm that is raging, and everybody is scared to death. They're throwing water out of the boat as quick as they can. It's terrible. A squall is happening. Now, what I find is interesting about that is I'm sure they were afraid, as I just said, but it never says that in the passage. It never talks about that the disciples were so scared that this storm was happening that they didn't know what to do. No, what it says is they were just busy trying to save the boat. And finally, somebody says, Jesus is sleeping. Go wake Jesus up. So they wake Jesus up, and you know the story. Jesus steps up and calms the storm. What I find so intriguing about this story is the verse that says at the end that after Jesus had calmed the storm, after it was all over, that's when it says the disciples were terrified. Did you hear that? After the storm was all over, it uses the most intense word of the passage, which is they were terrified. I've learned that there are some people that get terrified when the calm happens. There are some people in our lives, and maybe sometimes it's us, that get terrified when there's actual calm. Oh, when it's storming and we have buckets to grab and we have people to wake up and we have screaming to do, we're fine. But it's in the calm that we have to come to terms with ourselves. You see, sometimes I've found that the calm can be scarier than the storm for some people. Individuals that I have come encounter with in my family and friends and life and career have been not professional storm chasers, but lifestyle storm chasers. As a matter of fact, I've found that some of them will, quite honestly, if they don't have a storm to get into, they'll go get into your storm. They'll go find you. And as a matter of fact, I've learned that not only will they go find a storm or your storm to get into, if it's not your storm, they'll try to drag you into the storm with them because they really like being in the middle of a storm. Now, if you sat down with this individual and you said, "Why are you terrified? It's calm. I mean, you just came out of the storm, man. Why are you terrified?" They couldn't articulate that. And they're not going to be able to articulate that they like to chase storms because they don't know what to do with their life in the calm. But the truth of the matter is, for some people, that is the truth. They don't know what to do with the calm. And maybe it's easier to live in the storm or somebody else's storm because we don't have to deal with the overall parts of us that need to be healed and the overall parts of who we are that need to be loved and nourished. You see, in the calm, we can start to look at those things. But in the storm, we're just worried about getting water out of the boat. You know, as I said, there are real storms that happen in our lives. But there are a lot of storms that I know people run down. They seek them. They live in turmoil, as I've already stated. I think sometimes it's harder to complain in the calm, and some people just like to complain. Now, you might be registered in your brain some names and situations that come up. I think about the character in the Winnie the Pooh series named Eeyore. Eeyore always liked to complain. Eeyore was a storm chaser. Now, maybe not a tornado, maybe not a violent thunderstorm, but Eeyore loved to always talk about what wasn't right. You know the character and you know the story. Sometimes it can be easier to complain than it is to deal with the calm and look about what we could actually change ourselves. As a matter of fact, and I've seen over and over and over, that some people who love to chase storms, for whatever reason, never, ever, ever find the ability to look inward and improve the quality of their life surrounding the things they can change. Let me give you an example of that statement I just made. A friend of mine who I love dearly is a severe alcoholic. He knows this. He admits to this. He's not willing to change it. He told me just a few weeks ago, he said, "Travis, the only time that I feel normal is when I'm intoxicated. I have to get intoxicated to feel at ease." And I heard what he told me and it sunk into my brain, and I know that my friend is a storm chaser. He can't deal with the calm. The calm feels so uncomfortable that he has to create the storm. I told my friend that day that I didn't use the storm analogy, but I said, until you can find some sobriety, your family will suffer. Until you can find some sobriety, your relationships with friends will suffer. Until you can find some sobriety, your relationships at work and your career may suffer. You see, what I've learned about storm chasers is that if they continue to chase storms, no one in their life has peace. And sometimes people in their lives have to choose to exit to go find peace. So I'm saying today to the storm chasers, and I know I'm not speaking to any, but if I happen to, if you are a storm chaser today, for your family's sake, let's find a way to stop. For your friends and your coworkers' sake, Let's find a way to stop. And maybe even from a spiritual standpoint, for God's sake, stop.